pushed the stroller into the real estate office. The agent asked, her tone a flat, routine formality. Selling the marital home. Does your husband agree to this? In the stroller, my daughter erupted into a sudden, piercing wail. With practiced ease, I scooped her up with my left arm, steadying her against my chest, and signed the contract with my right. My signature was shaky, a jagged line. My wrist had been throbbing with tendonitis for a solid month now. I'm widowed, I said. The man named Devin was still very much alive. He was living just as he always had before we got together. Vibrant, reckless, entirely untethered. But as a father, he had died the very day our daughter was born. My phone buzzed. It was Devin. When I picked up, it wasn't his voice but a young girl's. Oh, Devin, I honestly don't know how you stand it, she cooed, her voice dripping with mock sympathy. You're this brilliant, celebrated artist, and your wife is so let down. Look at this place. Even a rat would need GPS to navigate this mess. Ugh, is that dirty diapers I smell? Gross. Then came Devin's voice, muffled, as if he were pinching his nose in disgust. She didn't used to be like this. Ever since the baby came, she just got lazy. I calmly handed the signed contract back to the agent. Before the pregnancy, before the labor, I had loved him with every fiber of my being. Now, I hated him with that exact same intensity. Mom, I booked the flight. Sweetie, are you sure about this? 10 years, that's a long time to walk away from. Sunk costs shouldn't dictate major life decisions. I replied, my voice steady. Okay, the baby doesn't have a birth certificate yet, right? We'll register her back here in Boston. She'll take your last name. Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking. When I got into the taxi to head back to the apartment, a strange, crystalline calm washed over me. The intensity of my current hatred was the perfect, terrifying mirror of how passionately I had once loved him. We were the college sweethearts everyone envied. But poetry and grand romantic gestures crumble like ash when faced with the grinding, brutal reality of daily life. I held my daughter close, my exhausted body sinking into the worn cushions of the sofa. How did Devin and I end up here? The day I found out I was pregnant, Devin had been ecstatic. Fiona, he'd said, gently cupping my face, as soon as this busy season wraps up, I'm going to give you the most beautiful wedding. He had stroked my barely swollen belly, his eyes bright with tears. Trust me, Fiona, I'm going to be a great dad. We had been together for 10 years, from age 19 to 29. I believed him. I believed he'd be a great father, and I believed that a marriage certificate was just a formality we'd eventually get to. So I stepped back from managing his art studio to focus on a healthy pregnancy. To replace me, he hired a new assistant, Melanie. After that, Devin was always busy. Busy painting. Busy mentoring his students. Busy doing press. Busy organizing galleries. I was always waiting for the after this is done. But while I waited alone, Melanie was always there, hovering in his shadow. He missed one prenatal appointment after another. When I called him, it was always Melanie who answered. I'm so sorry, Fiona, she'd say, her tone sweet but sharp. Devin is right in the middle of an interview. The day my water broke, I was the one who had to call 911. The hospital bag had been packed by Melanie, and it contained nothing but a single pack of diapers and 2 newborn onesies. She had offered a plastic, apologetic smile when she dropped it off. I'm so sorry, Fiona. I really don't know much about babies. Devin was just so swamped, he couldn't leave the studio, so I had to wing it. I nearly died on that delivery table, enduring a grueling labor that ended in an emergency C-section. When the nurse finally wheeled me and my baby girl back to the recovery room, Melanie was sitting there, peeling an apple for my mother-in-law Martha. Martha was beaming. Oh, Melanie, if only you were my daughter-in-law. You're so young, so capable. When they saw me roll in, Martha cast a dismissive glance at my wrinkled, tiny daughter in the bassinet. Well, I guess when you have a baby at your age, your body just can't keep up. I ignored the bite in her words. Where is Devin? Why isn't he here? Melanie smiled smoothly. Fiona, Devin is deep in his creative zone for the new series. We couldn't let distractions interrupt his muse, could we? Martha chimed in. Exactly. Every woman has babies. Why make such a drama out of it? She then patted Melanie's hand pointedly. And besides, they never actually signed the papers. Don't call her Mrs. Ward. It's not appropriate. I pretended not to hear, biting my lip to suppress the agonizing throbbing of my fresh incision as I dragged myself back onto the hospital bed. During the hemorrhaging scare in the OR, when the alarms were blaring, a sudden clarity had hit me. People change. The love he had for me once was real, but so was his current chilling indifference. Devin had found someone who matched his rhythm again, and that someone was no longer me. I was the leftover piece of his past. I checked my phone. Devin had sent only one text, over 12 hours ago. Just focus on the baby. My mom and Melanie are there with you. A moment later, Martha and Melanie were grabbing their coats. Well, now that the baby's here, I can rest easy, Martha said. Melanie, let's get some dinner. Melanie's voice was bright. Oh yes. I heard that new French bistro down the street is incredible. Let's try it. In the bassinet, my daughter began to scream, her tiny lungs straining, the sound piercing my eardrums. I lay paralyzed on the bed, my body feeling as though it had been shattered, unable to even sit up. The moment she was born, I became a mother, biologically, emotionally, completely. But Devin? He was still the boy lost in his canvases, chasing romantic illusions. As the tears and postpartum bleeding flowed unceasingly, I whispered to myself, my baby doesn't have a father. The night nurse from the next bed over, seeing my struggle, came over to help change my daughter's diaper. When they're this small, they're either hungry, wet, or dirty, she said gently. Do you have any family coming? I shook my head. No. Could you recommend a private nurse? I need someone to start immediately. I'll pay extra. During my 5 days in the hospital, Devin never once showed up. When he occasionally remembered my existence, he'd send a brief text. Fiona, thank you for giving me such a beautiful daughter. Melanie sent me the photos. Melanie came by every afternoon, fulfilling Devin's duties as a husband in the most superficial way possible. Fiona, she'd say, Devin has a lecture today, so he can't make it. Or Fiona, Devin is speaking at his alma mater. The schedule was set months ago, he can't cancel. She called me Fiona. Never Mrs. Ward anymore. She came daily to report Devin's schedule, but it was pure performance, a subtle, cruel flexing of power. It made me dependent on her just to know where the father of my child was, and what he was doing. She snapped photos of my daughter to send to him, accompanying them with mocking texts she didn't bother to hide from me. Devin, she doesn't really look like you, does she? Haha. Or look at her cone head. She looks like an alien. I texted Devin. When are you coming? 2 hours later, his reply came. Once this gallery rush is over, my mom and Melanie are there. They'll take care of you. I stopped texting. You can't wake someone who is pretending to sleep. I was never going to get his after this. The day I was discharged, the wind was biting. I ordered my own taxi. My hired nurse held the baby. We had almost no luggage, just a diaper bag with formula, diapers, and my postpartum mesh underwear. The clothes I wore were stained, smelling of sweat and postpartum discharge. Those 5 days were the most humiliating, physically devastating days of my life. If Devin couldn't show up then, he didn't need to show up ever again. Rage burned in my chest, but I forced it down, reminding myself to breathe. Don't get angry, don't let it consume you. I repeated like a mantra. It will dry up your milk. It will make you sick. That only hurts you and the baby. I was a mother now. I had to be strong. The key turned in the lock of the apartment with a heavy, final click. The space was exactly as I had left it 5 days ago, spotless, smelling faintly of linseed oil and white turpentine from Devin's studio corner, and entirely devoid of any human warmth. My parents had bought this apartment for us as a college graduation gift. It was registered solely under my maiden name, Vance. Mr. and Mrs. Vance had been smart enough to ensure that Devin's name was never added to the deed, despite his mother Martha's endless, passive-aggressive remarks about sharing marital assets. Marital. I whispered to the empty hallway, a cold, dry smile touching my lips. We had never been married. Clara, the private pediatric nurse I had hired at the hospital, walked in behind me, carefully holding my daughter Maya, who was wrapped in a soft, clean pink blanket. Clara was a quiet, practical woman in her late 40s, and she hadn't asked a single question when she saw the state of my hospital room or the absence of a father. Let's get her settled in the bassinet, Fiona, Clara said, her voice a calm, steady anchor in the quiet apartment. You need to sit down. Your incision looks tight. I'm fine, I said, though the sharp, burning pain across my lower abdomen made it hard to keep my spine straight. I walked into our bedroom. I didn't look at the framed sketches of me that Devin had hung on the wall. The ones from our early 20s, when he used to call me his only muse. I walked straight to the closet, pulled out a large, empty suitcase and began packing. I didn't take much. I packed my clothes, my computer, and the folder containing my birth records and financial documents. Then I went to the nursery. The room was decorated with expensive, useless designer toys Devin had purchased to show off to his art friends on Instagram, but there were no diapers, no formula, and no practical blankets. I packed the few clothes my parents had sent from Boston, and then I walked into Devin's studio. On his easel sat the central piece of his new series, a massive, vibrant oil painting of Melanie sitting by a window, the light catching her youthful, unlined face. It was beautiful. It was full of life. It was the work of a man who was deeply, passionately in love with his muse. Beside the easel lay his legal folder, where he kept the certificates for his registered artworks. I picked up the folder, found the deed to the apartment, and slipped it into my bag. Fiona, Clara called out from the living room. The moving company's representative is here. I walked back out. The real estate agent, the same woman who had helped me sign the contract an hour ago, was standing in the lobby, her face carrying a quiet, professional sympathy. "Everything is processed, Ms. Vance," she said, handing me the receipt. "The buyer is a corporate executive who wants to move in next week. They've agreed to buy the furniture as is for an extra $50,000. The wire transfer will hit your Boston account by tomorrow morning." "Thank you, Sarah," I said, handing her the key. "Please have the locks changed as soon as we leave. If anyone attempts to enter before the buyer arrives, call the police." "I will," she said. At 4 p.m., the taxi arrived to take us to the airport. I stood on the sidewalk, the cold autumn wind whipping my hair across my face, the sharp pain in my lower abdomen a constant, stinging reminder of my survival. I didn't look back at the brick building where I had spent 10 years of my life. When we boarded the plane, the captain's voice announced our flight to Boston. As the jet engines roared to life, lifting us into the gray, cloudy sky, I looked down at Maya sleeping peacefully in Clara's arms. Her little face was quiet, her chest rising and falling in shallow, perfect rhythms. "Maya Vance," I whispered, gently touching her small, wrinkled cheek. "Welcome to your new life." For Devon, the gallery opening was a magnificent, intoxicating triumph. The elite of the city's art world had gathered at the downtown gallery, champagne glasses clinking under the bright track lights as they admired his new collection. Melanie stood by his side, wearing a stunning black silk dress, her laughter bright and high as she introduced him to the senior curators from the State Museum. "He's a genius," Martha, Devon's mother, bragged to a group of wealthy collectors near the bar. "My Devon has always had a pure, untouched creative soul. He doesn't let domestic distractions ruin his art." It was 11:30 p.m. when the gallery finally closed. Devon, slightly tipsy from the expensive Pinot Noir, climbed into the back of a taxi with Melanie and his mother. "Let's go back to the apartment," Martha said, her face flushed with excitement. "I want to see if that old woman my son was living with has cleaned up the nursery yet. Last time I went there, the smell of baby formula was suffocating." "Fiona is probably asleep," Devon said, his voice carrying a faint lazy indifference as he leaned his head against the headrest. "She's been very tired lately. She doesn't even want to look at my new sketches." "She's just lazy, Devon," Melanie cooed, wrapping her arm through her perfume sweet and cloying in the quiet car. "Ever since she had the baby, she's lost her drive. A real artist needs someone who can run beside him, not someone who sits on the sofa all day crying about her stitches." When the taxi pulled up to the apartment building, Devon reached for his keys. He walked up the stairs, his mother and Melanie chatting happily behind him. Inserted his key into the lock of Unit 302. It didn't turn. Devon's brow furrowed. He tried again, twisting the brass handle with more force, but the key remained frozen in the slot. "What's wrong, Devon?" Martha asked, her tone turning sharp. "Did she lock you out? How dare she? This is your home." "The lock. It's different," Devon said, his tipsy fog starting to evaporate, replaced by a sudden, cold unease. He knocked on the wood loudly. "Fiona. Fiona, open the door. It's me." There was no answer. The apartment was completely silent. Just then, the door of the neighboring unit opened, and Mr. Henderson, an elderly man who had lived on our floor for years, stepped out, carrying his trash bag. "Mr. Ward?" the old man said, looking at Devon with a mixture of surprise and quiet disdain. "What are you doing here?" "My key. It's not working," Devon said. "Did Fiona change the lock?" "Fiona." Mr. Henderson let out a dry, harsh laugh. "Fiona moved out this afternoon, Mr. Ward. A moving crew came at 3, cleared out her personal things, and then a locksmith changed the cylinder." The real estate agent said. "The apartment was sold." "Sold?" Martha shrieked, her voice rising into a high-pitched scream that echoed in the quiet hallway. "That's impossible. This is my son's apartment. She can't sell it." "It was registered under her name, Mrs. Ward," Mr. Henderson said coldly, his eyes locking onto Melanie's black silk dress with utter contempt. "And, considering how you all treated her during her pregnancy, I'm only surprised she didn't sell it sooner." He slammed his door shut, leaving the three of them standing in the quiet, drafty hallway. Devon's face went completely pale. His hand shook as he pulled his phone from his pocket, dialing my number. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." He tried my mother's number. "The user has blocked your calls." He looked at the brass lock of the apartment, and then at Melanie, who was staring at him with a sudden, silent panic. The golden, untouchable prince of the art world was suddenly standing in a public hallway, homeless, with nothing but his paintbrushes and a pocket full of empty success. The winter in Boston was cold, but the brick townhouse my parents owned in the Back Bay neighborhood was warm and filled with the scent of fresh pine, vanilla, and clean baby lotion. My father had hired the best family law firm in Massachusetts to handle Maya's registration. There is no father listed on her birth certificate, Fiona. My father said, his voice calm and steady as he sat across from me in the study, holding a cup of hot tea. Under state law, since you two were never married, Devon has no legal custody rights over her. He can attempt to sue for paternity, but given his complete absence during her birth and his lack of financial support, no judge in this state will grant him visitation. He won't sue, I said quietly, looking down at Maya, who was lying in my lap, her dark eyes looking up at me with a quiet, curious intelligence. His mother, Martha, is too proud to let him admit he was abandoned, and Melanie won't want him spending his gallery profits on child support. I was right. For the first 6 months, Devon made no attempts to contact us. His social media feeds, which I occasionally checked through my mother's account, were filled with a frantic, forced celebration of his new life. Posted photos of Melanie at his exhibitions, photos of his mother drinking champagne, and articles calling him the rising star of the Eastern Coast. But the art world is a small, vicious ecosystem, and talent without discipline is a fragile thing. Without me to manage his studio's taxes, his gallery relations, and his financial contracts, Devon's operations began to hemorrhage. Melanie was young, demanding, and completely incompetent. She spent his profits on luxury shopping trips, demanded his assistant pool be fired so she could manage his calendar herself, and lost 3 major corporate mergers because she forgot to reply to their legal drafts on time. Martha, meanwhile, began demanding more money for her retirement home in the suburbs, leading to screaming matches in Devon's studio that his students didn't bother to keep secret. His creative zone was gone. His new paintings were criticized by the media as shallow, repetitive, and devoid of the emotional depth of his early works. He had lost his muse, and he had lost his anchor. On Maya's first birthday, my mother threw a small, private party in our garden. The lawn was decorated with pink balloons and white roses. Maya stood on her own 2 feet, her little fingers clutching my fingers as she took her first, wobbly steps across the grass, her laughter bright and clear in the warm summer air. She has your eyes, Fiona, my mother said, her face glowing with a deep, maternal pride. She looks like a Vance. She is a Vance, Mom, I said, a soft, peaceful smile touching my lips. She is entirely ours. 2 years after I left the city, the Boston Contemporary Museum of Art held its annual summer gala. It was a prestigious event, bringing together the wealthiest donors, collectors, and artists of the East Coast. My father, who was a major benefactor of the museum, had purchased a table for our family near the front stage. I stood by the glass balcony, holding a glass of white wine. I was dressed in a simple, elegant dark emerald silk gown, my hair styled in a soft low bun. The exhaustion and the pale, broken look I had carried from that municipal hospital 2 years ago were completely gone. My skin was healthy, my posture tall and confident, my eyes carrying a quiet, unshakable strength. Fiona. The voice came from behind me. It was raspy, dry, and carried an echo of a life I had buried in the dirt. I slowly turned around. Devon stood there. He was wearing a black tuxedo, but the fabric hung loosely over his shoulders. His face gaunt, his eyes hollow and dark. He looked like a man who had spent 2 years in a storm, his creative soul withered by the sheer, desperate struggle of his own making. Beside him stood Melanie, her face pale, her cheap black dress looking out of place among the old money elegance of the Boston crowd. Martha stood behind them, her face thin and lined with a bitter, defensive anger. Fiona. Oh my God, it's really you, Devon whispered, his golden eyes wide, with a sudden, devastating shock as he scanned my face, my gown, and the gold jewelry glinting on my wrists. You look so beautiful. You look so different. I am different, Devon, I said, my voice calm, flat, and completely neutral. It was the tone one would use with a stranger who had stopped to ask for directions. Fiona, we need to talk, he said, taking a trembling step forward, his hands reaching out toward me. I made a mistake. Melanie, she's not what I thought. The studio is going under. My mother is screaming at me every day. I have no inspiration left, Fiona. My canvas is empty. I need you. I need my muse. Your muse? I let out a soft, dry laugh that had no humor in it. Your muse is currently standing beside you, Devon, in a black silk dress. Fiona, please. Melanie blurted out, her voice high and desperate, her arrogant, smug attitude from 2 years ago completely gone. We were wrong. Devon was stressed. He didn't mean to ignore you. Just help him. If he doesn't get this Boston sponsorship, the gallery is going to repossess his studio. That has nothing to do with me, I said, taking a slow sip of my wine. Martha stepped forward, her face twisted in a mixture of anger and desperation. Fiona, you have a daughter. She is a ward. You can't let her father go bankrupt. What will people say about her pedigree? I looked at Martha, the woman who had sat in my hospital room and told me Mrs. Ward was inappropriate. The woman who had laughed as she went to get a French dinner while I was bleeding in my bed. My daughter's name is Maya Vance, I said, each word dropping like a heavy iron. Weight onto the marble floor. She has no father. Her birth certificate is blank, and her family is the Vance family of Boston. You are nothing to her. Fiona, please let me see her. Devin begged, falling to his knees on the marble floor of the balcony, his tears finally spilling over his eyelids, his hands reaching for the hem of my gown. I'm her father. I have a right to see my daughter. You had a right to see her 2 years ago, Devin, I said, stepping back from his grip, my movement carrying a quiet, unshakable strength. You had a right to be there when she was born, when she was crying, when she was starving. But you chose your creative zone. You chose Melanie. I turned my back on them, looking out at the dark waters of the Boston Harbor, where the city lights were reflecting off the waves, warm and bright. The exhibition is starting, Devin, I said softly. You should go back to your paintings. They're the only things that will ever love you back. I walked away, my high heels clicking sharply against the marble, leaving the twin ghosts of my past life kneeling in the dirt of their own ruin. The morning in Boston was bright and beautiful, the summer sun filtering through the green leaves of the maple trees in our garden. I sat on the wooden swing, holding Maya in my lap. She was 2 years old now, her dark curls dancing in the warm wind, her little fingers tightly clutching a small yellow squeaky duck, a new toy my mother had bought her yesterday. Clara, look, the butterfly, she chirped, pointing her small finger at a yellow monarch fluttering over the white roses. I see it, Maya, Clara said, walking over with a tray of fresh fruit and a warm smile. It's very pretty. My phone buzzed in my coat pocket. It was an email from my father's legal counsel. Fiona, Devin Ward's petition for paternity testing was dismissed by the Massachusetts State Court this morning. The judge ruled that his complete lack of financial support, his absence during her first 2 years of life, and the fact that he never signed the original registry constitutes a total waiver of parental rights. The case is closed. I looked at the screen, a quiet, deep sense of peace finally settling into my chest. The 10 years of waiting were over. The C-section scar was healed. The cold, heavy rain of my past was gone, replaced by the warm, clear light of the Boston summer. I deleted the email, turned off the screen, and slipped the phone back into my pocket. Mama. Swing. Maya laughed, her small body leaning back against my chest as she reached up to pat my cheek. All right, sweetie, I whispered, wrapping my arms tightly around her, my heart feeling a sudden, deep fullness. Let's go higher. I pushed off the grass, the swing rising into the warm, bright air, carrying us forward into a life that was finally, beautifully, and entirely our own.